Coming up tonight, the Empress of the Seas finds ships galore. The crews show that the world can fit in even small packages. And we learn about how the Empress can still save the world at the same time. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day 6 of the cruise view from onboard the Empress of the Seas. Today was Tuesday, October 15th, 2019, and it was the second of our 2 sea days. We had one at the beginning that brought us down to Mexico, and now today we had the one to bring us back north towards Miami. It is nearly 1 a.m. It's about 12:45 right now, and off to the side of the ship you can see some lights. Most likely the lights of Bimini, and directly off the other side we are near Miami but nowhere close enough to see, and you can just see a glow on the horizon. That is likely all the lights from that city over there. Our noontime location today, we were at 23 degrees and 32 minutes north by 82 degrees and 28 minutes west. To get to CocoCay tomorrow, we've been traveling at over 18 knots pretty much continuously. There are moments we passed 19 knots. Most part it was in the 18s though. At noon, the closest land was Cuba still. We were directly south of Key West. At the time, we were probably a little less than 25 miles away from Havana itself. We haven't seen too many ships outside that visit to Cozumel yesterday, but we did see many today. We saw a ton of cargo ships, a lot more than we saw going down for some reason. There were tons of cargo ships. Anytime you went out on that top deck today, you could see them off both the port and the starboard side. Just cargo ships everywhere, for the most part traveling either with or against us. There weren't too many going perpendicular. There's only about one I think I saw that did that. And in addition to those cargo ships, we saw one cruise ship today at 4 p.m. We saw the Oceania Cruises Regatta. That was traveling ahead of us and then turned perpendicular to us and crossed our path. It stayed a bit farther away to try to get a really good view, but you could definitely see it on the horizon, and with my zoom camera I could definitely tell exactly which one it was and see the name Regatta written on the side of that ship. That was not the only ship though. During dinner tonight we also spotted one more at about 5:35 p.m. We passed the Majesty of the Seas. We saw her when we were on our last sea day. We passed her as we were heading to the south. She was headed back up north to her home port. Now we passed her in the opposite direction as she's making her route down to the Mexico destinations while we're headed back up towards the home port. So as for our weather today, it was a sea day. That's the day the weather really matters because everybody is stuck on board and we don't have much flexibility to do anything beyond what the ship offers. So good weather is always important, and that is what we had today. We had our sunrise this morning at 7:06 a.m. and our sunset tonight was at 6:44 p.m. It was during dinners. I didn't get to see it too much, but looking out those giant back windows of the main dining room here on board the Empress of the Seas, it was directly behind us. We turned just in time for that sunset to really get a good view of it setting behind the ship there. Conditions today, according to the compass, were cloudy. For the most part, it seemed sunny. There were clouds around the ship as we saw those cargo ships and cruise ships around. Some of them looked almost like ghost ships as they faded in and out of view when those clouds would cast a shadow over them. But for us, it seemed like we were mainly staying in the sun. Not sure if they were weaving around the clouds or not. Typically, it's not that important to do if it's not a rain cloud, but we definitely were in far more sunny conditions than cloudy as the compass had listed, which is a good thing. We did also see a couple, I think 1 or 2 shower clouds that were off the side of the ship that we avoided today as well. The high today was listed as 84 degrees, and it was certainly a warm day, but not uncomfortably warm like the past several days. We had almost no humidity today, which made it very nice to be outside on any of those top decks, but we did have very high winds. Last night they had the top deck, deck number 11, completely closed down because of those winds. Today it was open, you could go up there, but they removed the hammocks from the front of the deck, so you could not utilize those. The ones that were back a bit farther were still there, and the wind was certainly less at those areas than at the front of the ship. And in addition to those hammocks, they actually removed all the chairs that were at the forward part of the deck as well. So there was not a whole lot of seating area up there today during this sea day, but it was definitely very windy when you're at that front of the ship. But at least it was open, so it was available to go out there and check out what was sailing around us. Last night I mentioned the ship was doing a bit of rocking. They emptied that pool because of that. And today we had roughly 3-foot seas. It was still rocking. You could feel a little bit of movement in the ship. Every once in a while you heard a little bit of noise from it, but for the most part things were calm all day long. The pool wasn't rocking too bad. It just seemed like a normal sea day on any other ship, but compared to those very smooth seas we had earlier in the sailing, it was noticeable that we were moving today. So then moving on to the compass, it was a busy day of activities from first thing in the morning all the way through last thing tonight. Started early at 10 a.m. in the Centrum. They had a towel folding demonstration hosted by Andy and 3 of the housekeeping staff. They went through, showed how they made a couple of those towel animals you get in your cabin, and handed out a little pamphlet. It was about 10-15 minutes total for that demonstration. And from there I went straight over to here, the Starlight dining room, because on the Empress Seas they have something a little more unique than the other ships. They don't do a breakfast and a lunch service on sea days. Instead, they do a brunch that is available from 9 until noon on every sea day. And with that brunch, you get a variety of items. They've got traditional breakfast items, as well as some of the lunch items, such as a very good barbecue sausage that they had, along with salad, all kinds of mix-ins. And if you don't want stuff from the buffet, they also have a selection of made-to-order items that you can get from the kitchen, including omelets if you want that. So you get a lot of variety in it, and they also serve, of course, those mimosas as part of the brunch service on board the Empress of the Seas. So I got there about 10:15, wanted a private table, had to wait maybe 3-4 minutes to get one of those, was seated, didn't take long to go through everything, got plenty of food, made multiple trips up to the buffet, and total was out of there about 11 o'clock, so it was about 45 minutes total to go through there. And that was so that I could head back across the ship to the Royal Theater, because at 11 a.m. this morning they had Meet the Stars. We've seen this on some other cruises as well. Typically it is the cast on some of the bigger ships like the Oasis class. It'll be a mix of the different casts. With the Empress of the Seas, there is just one cast, so it was 6 cast members from the Royal Theater production cast, and it wasn't too crowded. Everything on board the Empress of the Seas isn't too crowded. There aren't that many people on board to make an event feel crowded. So today it was about 20 people, which is probably what you would expect when you compare the scale of this ship to some of the larger ships in the fleet. And with that, it was a very intimate environment. 6 cast members sat right on the edge of the stage, and they had microphones so everyone could hear them, but they didn't pass the mic around. They didn't have staff member going around to get the questions from people. It was very informal, more conversational, with the guests right up front in the theater able to just ask them the questions that they wanted. And unlike the normal Meet the Stars where the questions end and it just kind of stops, this blended in the backstage tour as well, so that once the Q&A section was over, they then led everybody up onto the stage and took a lap around the back of the theater to see the dressing rooms, some of the prop staging and costume staging areas, and just see what goes on behind the stage during those shows. A little more information about the actual stage, some stories about things that have gone on during previous shows that they performed, and overall just made it a far more intimate and informative experience than the traditional Meet the Stars event would be on the other ships that we've seen. So that was 11 o'clock. It lasted just about 45 minutes, just a little bit over that. And from there, directly outside in the Centrum, once again, they then had the chef's cake demonstration. Seen this on many ships. Today's I only saw the setup and the teardown, so I'm not completely sure what they did with it, but for the most part it seemed like it was probably the more traditional one where the chef simply bakes the cake. It did not look like they were setting up for a competition or a bit of a comedy act with that, but I didn't see it to know for sure how they performed that one. The comp is explicitly listed 12-1, but I only got to see setup, and by 12:30 they were already over with it, so I'm not sure how they exactly did that one. But from there I then went up to the pool deck because they had pool volleyball competition at 12:15. It lasted until 1 o'clock. That one was hosted by Elvis up there. Basically, it wasn't, as we've seen on some of the other ships where they do the crew versus guest, it was entirely guest teams competing through different rounds to figure out the ultimate champion of the tournament. And that was on the pool side of the pool deck. It's not a massive pool deck, but there is two sides to it. So that was the pool side of it, and at 1 o'clock then on the bar side of the pool deck, they then had the International Sexiest Man Competition. That was hosted by Casey. As it typically does, it involved 3 judges sitting out there judging the competition, starting with a first round of dancing and trying to persuade those judges, followed by a second round where Casey tossed incredibly softball questions to all of the competitors in order to figure out just how intelligent they are. And then ultimately they came to a score of who they determined to be the sexiest man in the world. And that, while not being the fullest of pool decks, mainly because she's not the fullest of ships, there aren't that many guests compared to the big ones, she did get a very large lineup of competitors for. That's something we've seen across the board. Despite her size, and despite how empty many of the venues often feel, she does get a very solid turnout to all of her events throughout the day, enough to actually perform the events, which we've seen on more than one occasion. On those large ships, they simply don't get the turnout they need in order to perform those, and even the Sexiest Man competition and the belly flop one that we saw on the other sea day has struggled to get enough people to actually perform the contest, and they had no issue on this ship at any of the events. Occasionally some of the trivia ones, some of those Centrum ones, they'll have to stall a little bit to get the next person to come out, but for the most part they always seem to have enough people on board to handle all these events even better than some of those large ships, even with the much smaller crowds that they get. And the benefit of those smaller crowds is everybody gets to be closer. Everyone's closer, get a much better view, and you have fewer people blocking your view, less fighting for position, because there just aren't that many people trying to see it all at once, that everybody can get that good view of it. So that was 1 o'clock, and it lasted half an hour. I then went back downstairs to the Royal Theater, been all over this ship from the front to the back, the top to the bottom, went back to the bottom with an afternoon movie showing of The Secret Life of Pets 2. That was 1:30 in the Royal Theater. It was about 80-minute long movie. They've done several movies in the Royal Theater. They're doing them up on the pool deck all the time in the afternoons, evenings. It's usually sometime like 3, 6, 9 in the evening and afternoon. They'll show a couple different movies. But they've also done Royal Theater showings from time to time, including this one in the afternoon. And they seem to get a surprisingly large turnout for them every time they perform them, especially the Royal Theater ones get a slightly larger turnout than those outdoor movie ones. So that lasted till just about 3 o'clock. And then after that, I had a little bit of time to kill walking around the ship, looking at things, caught that Oceania cruise ship. But then 4:15, back in the Centrum, was the Flash Trivia Prize Throw Madness, hosted by Andy, as many of those trivia competitions have been in the Centrum. And this one was a little different than the others. It did not involve a single contestant at a time. It didn't involve one person answering it and the rest of the audience kind of spoiling the game with throwing out their thoughts and opinions of what the correct answer is. It was a trivia contest that everybody could participate in. He stood up on that central platform, as he often has, but every question was true or false answers. And based on what you thought, you went to either the port or the starboard side, with one side representing true, the other false. Whichever side is the winning, he'd then throw out a whole bunch of prizes to the crowd that were over on that side to collect. And he continued that through several rounds of questions. Pretty much everybody in there got a prize for just being present because there were so many prizes thrown out. And it was a 4:15 one, which is an awkward time because most people are getting ready for dinner. I was passing through there on the way back to my cabin to get ready for dinner, but they did get a decent turnout for the competition, and pretty much nobody was up watching it. There were very few people. Everybody seemed to be down participating in this game because it was one of those games anyone could participate in without feeling like they were put on the spot, which often turns some guests off of participation. So that was 4:15. Then at 5:30, it was dinner. Tonight was the second formal night of the sailing. We had 2 sea days, formal night on each one of those. Actually officially listed as dress to impress now. They no longer use the formal, casual, semi-formal stayings anymore. It is now casual or dress to impress, as it was tonight. And tonight was not just the second formal night, it was also the official Royal Caribbean 50 Years Bold celebration dinner tonight. So for my meal tonight, the starter, I began with the green lentil soup. This is one I believe I had on the Ovation of the Seas as well. I remember the meat that was in it having an incredibly strong flavor. I'm pretty sure I had that one on the Ovation of the Seas. Either way, it was a very delicious dish with a lot of flavor to it. And then for my main course, I went with one of my favorites, probably my favorite dish of the entire menu that we've had on the past several sailings. That is the cheese tortellini. That one has a blue cheese sauce to it, and it is always a delicious one. This one was just the perfect amount. I remember when I had it on the Grandeur of the Seas, I had to get a second order because they did not give you much. They gave you just the right amount of food on board the Empress for that dish. And that was the dish that on board the Ovation of the Seas, they did not have the appropriate ingredients and had to change what the menu item was at the last minute. So it was nice to finally get that one on here because that is one of my favorite dishes. And then for dessert, I went with an item off the classics menu, the apple pie Lamode. And that one was different than the apple pies we've seen on the other ships. It was more of an apple blossom. It had that nice little puffball style. It had that nice little folded pie crust style apple pie with all the apple goo inside the middle and that crust folded and fried around it. And then, of course, it is a la mode, so it came with a small cup of vanilla ice cream. In addition to that, I got a dish of the strawberry ice cream. Haven't really gotten much ice cream for dinner. Had plenty on the top deck, but decided to get one tonight because that strawberry in the dining room was always a delicious one compared to the other ones. And in addition to those desserts, as I mentioned, it was the 50 Years Bold celebration tonight, so they also had that special birthday cake. Unlike the Ovation of the Seas where they had one for every single guest, tonight they had just one for every table. So you did not have to order one. You didn't choose it as your dessert. You did your standard dessert, ordered what you wanted, and then every table got one to kind of share among everyone. So that was one of the things with the Ovation where we ended up with so many desserts that night because you had to have that cake, but there were special ones. This setup, it's a little less wasteful. There were a lot of cakes left behind on the Ovation, and that didn't seem to be the case tonight. And with only one per person, it meant that at least those lollipops and some of those other items that we've seen kind of go to waste before are eaten because hopefully at least one person at the table is interested in it. And then, just like we saw on board the Ovation, they did have a special performance from all the waiters and assistant waiters and the chefs on board the Empress. They had the head waiters from various sections go through, collect their team, and head up on those stairs to do a little dance for everybody. And that, of course, was something that we saw in the Ovation of the Seas. That was something that is specific to this 50 Years Bold celebration. We saw another performance back on the last formal night, but tonight's was that more energetic, youthful celebration of the 50-year anniversary of Royal Caribbean. So dinner was 5:30. At 7 o'clock, rushed across the ship to make it to the early headliner show time. There are 2 each night. Tonight's were 7 and 9 o'clock. But looking through the compass, it seemed like hitting that earlier showing enabled seeing more items tonight and got rid of a little bit of a dead zone. So we made sure we're over there in time for that 7 o'clock showing. It was a headliner showtime starring Troy Thirdgill, who should sound familiar because we saw him on board the Anthem of the Seas as well. And we've seen comedians repeat, we've seen jugglers repeat, we've seen all kinds of acts repeat. And the one common thing that seems to come through them is that they often repeat the same material. It's the same act over and over again. Tonight, that was far from the case. This act was probably 95% original content for this show. And he was hilarious when we saw him on the Anthem of the Seas. He was hilarious again tonight. The one thing that he did tonight that was brilliant was he introduced a concept, a new joke that we had not heard before, we had not seen on the Anthem of the Seas, and it laid a groundwork that he was able to follow through the entire show with. And every joke in the show, except for, I think, one, was a brand new one that we had not seen before. So it was a very good original concept show, just as funny as the last time, but unlike repeats like we've seen many times, this was a brand new one. And unlike a lot of the comic acts, which seem to kind of fib on things, push the boundaries of the truth, and try to take a joke and flip it to be wherever they're at, this one seemed to have a lot of jokes and comedy written specifically for cruise ships, more relevant to the cruise ships. Almost the entire show seemed to in some way center around cruise ships and cruise guests and their population. It was a much more focused and relevant comedy show than many of the other ones that we've seen, and it was hilarious. It had a lot of back and forth with the audience. The audience really got into heckling him tonight, and he went full in on playing into all of those jokes and that interaction. And overall, it was a very fun, energetic, and entertaining show tonight. If you ever see him on a sailing, be sure to go see him. He also did something we have not seen very much, something we've now seen two comedians do, and that is make a joke on Disney Cruise Line. He had an entire section about Disney Cruise Line and joking around that. Mike Pace had a joke around Disney Cruise Line as well while interacting with a guest about a child that they brought on board. So we've seen Disney Cruise, I mentioned both times. That's something we often don't see. Usually it's the Holland America that we see being joked around a lot, or Carnival. So it's nice to see that love of the other lines spread around a little bit more. So that was a 7 o'clock showing, lasted until about 7:45, then right outside the Royal Theater back to that Centrum, because they had the Crew International Parade of Flags. And this ship, I've said it so many times even during this episode, never gets crowded. This is the first time I think I ever saw this ship get a bit crowded. Decks 5 and 6 were filled. You could not get a space at that railing, went up to deck 7, and even by the time it started, deck 7 was filled. People were on deck 8. The entire Centrum, every level from top to bottom, was filled. And this is an event that often doesn't get the biggest crowds. There are people that show up to all these kinds of events, but for the most part, the flag parade is not one of those major events that everybody marks their calendar for, rushes out to see. But tonight, it was certainly a massive event that everybody wanted to see. It was the fullest event of any of the ones, I think, on this sailing in terms of capacity utilization. And everybody was in it. There was so much energy in that room. They brought all the crew out with their flags, and then Elvis went through every nation that is represented on board and listed how many crew members they have. Any of the nations that had representatives that wanted to do a performance went to the center and did their little dance, act, whatever it may be to represent their nation. And both the crew and the guests were incredibly supportive of every nation throughout that. The energy stayed consistent from beginning to end with every nation that was called out. And the Centrum, we haven't seen too much out of that venue. It's been used, but it's always been the same. Blue lights at night, orange lights during the day. We saw some white during the captain's reception. Tonight it was finally utilized to its potential. They had different colored lights going on, very similar to what we saw in Grandeur. Every level had lights. They had different patterns, different colors. They had some that would just slowly rotate around, some that would chase up and down, all different kinds of patterns, just like Grandeur was able to do. So the Centrum doesn't have the full-blown renovation style that they did with the Grandeur and some of those others to give that Centrum wow effect to it, but it certainly has the technology package to do the full lighting system that they have there. So it's kind of interesting they don't utilize it for a little bit more than what they do. They certainly could have parties and other events in there, because that center stage at the bottom, could be used as a center stage, and they do have the lighting for at least 70% of the effect that they have in there. So that was 8 o'clock, lasted until just before 8:30. Shuttering going on. Not sure what's happening right now. It's almost like when you dock and the thrusters are going against the shallow waters. I do not see anything around us because there are plenty of windows in the dining room, and you'd be able to see if there were something out there at the moment. So that lasted until about 8:30. Then 8:30 to 9:30 went to Bolero's, the venue we haven't mentioned yet because they did have another round of that evening karaoke going on. And that has gotten fuller every night of the sailing. Each night they've had karaoke, each night it's gotten more crowded than the night before. Tonight, the venue was pretty much filled this time. And when that ended, a lot of people moved across to the Centrum for the weakest link. Hosted by Andy, it was another one of those trivia games in the Centrum. Small scale show style, but certainly a lot of entertainment value to it and fills a little bit of energy into that venue. It really does need a large crowd at the beginning. There weren't a lot of people, lacked the energy, did not have a lot of potential, but as soon as that 9 o'clock showing let out of the Royal Theater and that crowd joined into the Centrum, the energy, the entertainment value really picked up in that one. And that was 9:30, went until 10 o'clock, because 10 o'clock it then moved to a venue we have not used a single time yet this cruise, the Viking Crown Lounge. Very small lounge up on the top deck. They don't do a lot in it compared to when I was on board in 2002. They used that venue a lot. They had a lot of different lectures, seminars, all kinds of things going on up in the Viking Crown Lounge during the days. Today, we saw a lot in the Centrum. They were not using the Centrum as heavily in 2002 as they are now. So it seems like the function of that lounge kind of shifted to the Centrum. And instead it's a little more of a quiet place to get away from it all and relax. But tonight it was far from quiet because it was all around the 70s party. It started at 10 o'clock with the 70s pre-party. That featured the DJ playing some 70s music, getting everybody going, getting the entertainment level rising, and getting the energy there. So at 10:15 they could then go into the 70s line dance class, get everybody out onto that dance floor and get everyone moving. Because 7:30, the official 70s Disco Inferno began with the entire cruise director staff along with several other entertainment staff members from throughout the ship joining in to help put on that party. Featured a lot of the standard elements that we're used to, of course featuring the village people. They came down during the performance from the gym area, joining into that party on the first level of the Viking Crown Lounge, filling that dance floor, getting everybody in there. And it was a very traditional 70s Disco Inferno. The standard track listing, same kind of routines we typically see in these parties. But the one difference was it was all one flat level floor. It was not a Centrum with multiple levels or anything like that. There was no stage. It was all right on the dance floor with the guests right next to it, in front of them, surrounding them. And it was a very small venue, so there wasn't a lot of room to really be around watching. You had to be on that dance floor if you wanted to see anything because it was that one flat level. And the way the lounge is actually set up, the middle is elevated a little bit, so if you were out on the edges, you could not see as well because you were looking up through the crowd. So for me, I went up to that top level gym area to get a nice shot looking down of the entire party. But that was 10:30. The cruise director staff stuck around probably about 50 minutes, and then they left, and with them, so did most of the party. It was a fairly full dance floor, and that DJ did start playing before they left, but as they slowly started to fade out of the floor and head back upstairs, the crowd seemed to very rapidly leave. Pretty much within 30 seconds of them stepping off the floor, before they were even up to that top level, probably about 60% of the dance floor was gone. So it did not seem like the party stuck around long after that cruise director staff left. And that was something you'd think could be helped by the fact that it is one venue. There wasn't a Centrum party and then a move to another venue for the late night club party as well. It was one location where everybody could continue with that energy, and some people did, but for the most part it seemed to empty out at that point. So one other item tonight's compass that we also had was, last night I mentioned showing a Rocket Man. They did have that playing in the Royal Theatre as well tonight at 10:45 until about 12:45, so just about half an hour ago that ended. And that was something they showed yesterday. I think they carried over to help fill a little bit of void from today's schedule. So that does it for the compass. It went from early morning to night. It was a surprisingly full one today. It typically seems like as we go towards the end of these sailings, the later sea days have a little more going on as people are done exploring the ship, done figuring out what they want to do on their own, and looking for something new to do. And that's where we tend to see more of these items pop up throughout the day, as we did today, with a lot of items scattered throughout the afternoon. But we do have a couple more items tonight. Tonight I got to sit down with the hotel director, John Denton, who I had dinner with the other night, and got to learn a little bit about what he does in that role on board the Empress Seas, but also about the Royal Caribbean disaster relief efforts.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Denton. My privilege to serve as the hotel director on board.
Today I am joined by John, who is the hotel director on board the Empress Seas. Thanks for joining me.
Good to see you. Welcome.
Could you provide a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. Not a traditional story, I don't think. Originally I got a law degree back in England. Then in the 80s I was in Antigua. I ran the Siboney Beach Club on Dickinson Bay and a little restaurant there. And then I had my first pizza shop the same day Eric Clapton opened his. So I went to mine, he went to mine, I went to his. Good fun in Antigua. In the 90s I was in Africa, Swaziland, and then in South Africa after the elections. I worked for Sun International, so I was in casino resort management. And then I had a chain of restaurants throughout South Africa, Macarib family restaurants. Returned home in the noughties. I was on the board for Stanley Casinos. I had 44 casinos throughout England, which was a lot of fun. And then finally, in 2005, I got a green card and decided to move over to Florida. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do in Florida. A friend of mine phoned me from London and said, do I want to work? What do I want to do? I said, no, what have you got? He said, I've got a great job for you. You get 4 months off a year. I said, fabulous, what is it? He said, running a cruise ship. I said, what a great opportunity. So I went down, interviewed with Royal Caribbean, and joined Royal Caribbean 13 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So which ships have you been on with your time at Royal Caribbean?
I've been very fortunate to be around on quite a few ships. I was on Mariner, Adventure, Sovereign, Monarch, Legend, Radiance, Monarch, Explorer, Enchantment, Majesty, Grandeur, and Empress of the Seas. Mm-hmm. So I've been very fortunate. I've been all around the world. It's been a really great experience working for Royal Caribbean.
What led you to the Empress of the Seas?
Empress of the Seas, I was given the opportunity. I'd been doing a lot of 3 and 4 day cruising out of Port Canaveral, which is where I live. I live just north of Port Canaveral in New Smyrna Beach. And the opportunity came up that I could come and do 2 ships. I could do the Empress and the Grandeur. And Empress was doing Cuba. And I thought, wow, fantastic, you know. So I really enjoyed the time we were in Cuba. And then he gave me a different opportunity in the north to go to Bermuda and Canada and the northeast on the Grandeur. So that was another great opportunity to spread some more knowledge and gain some more experience.
So what are the responsibilities of the hotel director on board?
Well, essentially, you're a member of the executive committee, along with the captain, the staff captain, the chief engineer and the HR manager. So we have an overall responsibility for managing the business and managing the teams. First priority, as with everybody on the ship, is safety. So I am in charge of all the evacuation. So we're responsible to make sure that we can account for all the guests, all the crew in case of an emergency, and make sure they get safely to their emergency stations. And then as a department head, I have many divisions reporting into me. Food and beverage, housekeeping, cruise division, inventory, IT, housekeeping. So each of those division heads report into me. And then we work as a team, and then I give the feedback to and from the executive committee. So responsible for looking for the revenues, to manage the revenues and maximise that we're getting what we can in terms of profitability. Ratings, very important that guests are happy, so very important that the guest satisfaction ratings are positive. Crew satisfaction, key. You know, my belief is the most important people on the ship are the crew, and then the guests, and then the shareholders. So if you look at things in that way, if you've got a happy, motivated team, then that gives you the benefit of guests being happy, guests being satisfied. So really that's a key responsibility. Safety, managing expenses, all the things that you'd associate with running any regular business. I have line responsibilities to the captain for things on the ship, and also to my directors of hotel operations shoreside. So there's a lot of shoreside support teams as well. So in any of those divisions that I'm working with, they've got a shoreside leadership that can support as well.
The Empress of the Seas is not record-breaking or historical in terms of current standards with the industry, but she has been on the forefront of a lot of history in recent years. She's been the first on the scene to many of the disaster areas in the Caribbean and the Bahamas. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure, I can certainly speak about most recently the effects of Hurricane Dorian on the Bahamas. As you know, was horrific, devastating, and we were very proud and very honoured to be the first ship sent down by Royal Caribbean. In fact, the first ship into Grand Bahama Island after the disaster. The shoreside leadership team and Richard Fain had already committed to supporting and to doing whatever we could for the victims of Dorian in the Bahamas. The Bahamas is a very important destination to Royal Caribbean International. We've been going there for 50 years, and so we have a close ties with the Bahamian people and with a lot of the operations that are going on in the Bahamas. We don't only go to Nassau and Freeport, but our perfect day at CocoCay, our private island there. So the Bahamas is very important to us. So Richard Fain had already publicly announced that we'd be supporting, and we had the opportunity that same day, I think, or maybe the next day, of getting supplies on board and heading down to Freeport, where we could offload supplies and really start trying to help the people who needed help.
So those kinds of relief efforts are really not ship-wide but fleet-wide and coordinated on the shore side. How do they coordinate with the ships?
Yep, no, a lot of planning, a lot of infrastructure, and a lot of thought going into it. I don't know the exact details of what happened, but roughly what happened is the senior leadership, Richard Fain, Adam Goldstein, Michael Bailey, would have put their senior leadership teams into emergency war rooms or meeting rooms where they could all focus on the situation and come up with the best solutions. They would then appoint a go team, and the go team consisted of several specialists from different areas and volunteers of people who were prepared to give up time and effort to go there, as well as some journalists to go down and see what was happening so they could report back. Once the decisions had been made about what they wanted to do, then they get the whole of the operational areas involved, so the supply chain to get the items that we need, the marine team to make sure we've got proper plans in place, the revenue teams to work out how many guests we're taking, if we're taking any guests. So there's a lot involved in the planning from their side. Then the execution, some guidelines for us to help us in terms of executing the plan. And so they would come on board. My team would then work together to achieve what we were trying to do in terms of preparations of 10,000 meals, 10,000 bottles of water. Were we going to pick up refugees? How are we going to pick up? Who were we going to choose? So there's a lot of translating the desire into physical action points that we could carry out on the ship.
Yep. On every turnaround day, there's a lot of supplies and movement that goes on just to get a ship ready for a cruise. When you're undertaking these relief efforts, so you're also bringing on additional supplies specifically for that need. How is that extra load managed?
Well, this specific occasion, when we were the first ship going down there, we delayed our departure. And so we delayed, I think, for 3 hours so that the additional supplies could be brought on. So we'd already loaded in the morning. The additional supplies were then delivered to the ship. And then that was when the fun started. So we weren't sure if we'd got 10,000 ready-made meals. No. We had all the ingredients available to make 10,000 meals. So after the galleys had fed the guests, it was then a case of all hands on deck, for want of a better phrase, and everybody got involved, not just the food and beverage team, but everybody from the singers and the dancers and the cruise director, the maintenance team, the engine team. We had an entire 2 dining rooms full of production lines, so we could create these 10,000 meals, box them up, and then get them ready for delivery when we arrived the next day. So they worked right through the night, my team. So they're working, from 9:30 10 o'clock the night before till 6, 7 the next morning.
So it's such a big chain of process to get all this ready. How is that fully overseen to ensure that everything times up just right for that arrival?
That's a good question, and it wasn't as easy as we thought, because we couldn't go alongside in Freeport. No one had actually surveyed the area next to where we would dock. So we had to anchor off, and then we were going to use tenders to take the stuff ashore. And we started off, we loaded one tender with 2,000-3,000 bottles of water. We sent that over, and it was struggling. The swells in the sea conditions were not good. Managed to reach the other side, but then we couldn't move anything because the sea conditions were not positive. So then we managed to get 3 tugs to come alongside. The tugboats we then loaded with all of the supplies. The Go Team people, I think it was about 30 people from the Go Team, they got on board, and they managed to get to the shore. But then the weather conditions were not good, and the tugs wouldn't operate. So as the day progressed, it was becoming a little bit more stressful. So we'd managed to get all the meals there, we'd managed to get all the water there, we'd got our people there. But now came the situation of how are we going to get people off, and how many people are we going to get off? We took a decision, the captain took a decision to reuse our tenders to bring people, knowing that it would be a bit rough, but with special care and putting the best tender drivers, extra safety measures. That's what we did. So we managed to successfully bring the people back from the Go Team, and we also evacuated, I think, about 30 people from Grand Bahama, with some very young babies and key people who were in desperate need. So we managed to get them onto the ship as well. So in the end, it worked out, and then we managed to take those people with us to Nassau the next day, and then they got off the ship in Nassau.
So after you get all those supplies positioned onto Grand Bahamas, who manages and distributes those resources?
Yep, we had members of the Go Team who identified distribution centres that they could use, but this was our first visit there. So it was, quite stressful for them as well to identify and work out what can we use, how can we use it, who's going to be responsible, who in the government's liaising with our people to make sure everything was done properly and fairly and done the best way possible. So members of the Go Team liaised with the government officials, and then they set up the distribution centres, and then they came back on the ship.
All cruise ships are basically a slice of the world in a small little vessel.
Very good.
When these incidents happen anywhere around the world, they don't just affect the people in that location, they also affect the people that are spread throughout the fleet working on these ships.
Yes.
How do you work to ensure that crew are able to connect with their family and know what the situation is back home?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have that many Bahamians working for me on this ship, 1 or 2. But as a company, what we did was obviously anybody that we could help, that we needed to help, with friends or family who might have been at risk, we would do whatever we could to enable communication with them, to make sure they could find out how their families were. In the case of CocoCay, we evacuated the island because a lot of Bahamians work on CocoCay, and we made sure that they were safe, we got them safe, tried to help them with their families, and provided additional financial relief and additional emotional support and whatever they needed to try and get through it. And that happens, you make a point, it happens all around the world. If, for example, there's devastating weather in the Philippines, where we do have a large number of our crew come from the Philippines, Then we have a process in place where the HR team will step in, we'll provide telephone lines, we'll provide internet time, we'll provide whatever we can to help the people. And in cases of extreme need, the company is also financially generous to support people where they can.
So what is next for you then?
Right now, in fact, you've just timed it right. A couple of days from now, I've done a couple of months on here, so I'm going up to the Grandeur out of Baltimore. So she'll be coming down to the Caribbean. She'll be doing the Bahamas and CocoCay, so that's great. So I'll do that for a couple of months. And then next year, hopefully, I'll be doing the same. Although different itineraries. Empress now goes up to Bayonne next year. So I enjoy what I do. It's great fun.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the viewers?
I think don't necessarily judge a book by its cover. The smaller ships, although we don't have all the bells and whistles that the bigger ships have, we don't have the wave runners, we don't have the ice rinks, we don't have the aqua theatre. But what we do have is a lot of very committed, friendly, passionate crew members who can make sure even on the smaller ships you can experience the Royal Way and really enjoy a more personal experience with the crew members. So don't write off the smaller ships. You can have some great fun on our ships.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Royal Caribbean is obviously dependent on these islands, all these areas of the Caribbean, Bahamas, and around the world to make their product work. And when these incidents happen, they have consistently been one of the first on the scene to provide aid and help out. And as you heard, it is not just Royal Caribbean, but the Empress of the Seas that has been one of the first on the scene of so many of these incidents in recent years. And that is something that is going to continue for the foreseeable future. As we continue to have these storms, Royal Caribbean will continue to keep providing aid and helping out any way they possibly can, and that's something they've said before and they've shown over and over again, that they are not just saying the words or doing the motions, but actually believe in the importance of these efforts. So in addition to the interview, we also have a venue tour today. It is one of the areas that so many people complain about on the new ships. The larger ships simply don't have the same kind of environment, and that is the Promenade Deck, that lifeboat deck around Deck 6. Its purpose is to help you load into lifeboats if the ship is sinking, but how often does a ship sink? Rarely does, and that is where the Empress Seas has the ultimate promenade deck with incredible views for how small a ship she has, incredibly wide promenade deck with plenty of room to let people lounge out and still allow everybody to walk and run their laps around the deck. The modern lifeboat deck features the boat sitting right on the deck and little room for guests. In contrast, the classic promenade deck had the lifeboats mounted above with open views to the ocean for guests to enjoy. Despite her size, the promenade deck on board the Empress of the Seas features a significant amount of space for guests. With enough room for lounge chairs, regular chairs, and plenty of space left to walk, it's hard to find another ship with a deck quite like it. In addition to all of the space on both the port and starboard sides, the forward end of the deck overlooks the mooring area where you can see the crew at work while docking and departing from each port. At the aft end of the deck is a large area with space for large chairs, as well as a series of tables for guests to sit out and play games while the wake drifts away behind the Empress. It's no wonder this promenade deck has become a fan favorite and one of the things most commented about when people discuss the Empress of the Seas. So that is probably the area of the ship you hear the most comments about when you look at people who have been on the Empress of the Seas. They always seem to mention that promenade deck and just being blown away by simply how large a space it is and how beautiful that back deck area is. We've seen some other back decks like Grandeurs, but nothing quite like the Empress of the Seas has. So today, we were at sea. We're still at sea, but in roughly 5 hours, we're going to be pulling up to CocoCay. Perfect day at CocoCay, the brand new private destination of Royal Caribbean. They've had the island for many years, but they completely redid the place. Brand new piers so you can walk right off the ship. All new attractions, water park. Truly an incredible destination, and that is where we'll be tomorrow along with the Navigator of the Seas. So be sure to tune in tomorrow to check out that episode, learn all about that destination that just started operating a few months back. And for now though, I am Derek Cohn. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the links.